Hello there. My name is Jonathan Friedman, and you are listening to 5 FAQs by EHN Canada. This is the show where we scour the internet for the most frequently asked questions about mental health and addiction and ask an expert for their answers to them. Today, it is my honor and my pleasure to introduce my special guest, Dr. Meagan Yarmey. Dr. Meagan Yarmey is an insightful clinician, researcher, and educator with over 20 years of experience in higher education and the private sector. Her background includes clinical treatment and health promotion, research and evaluation, and various leadership capacities within the mental and behavioral health and well-being sector. In addition to a PhD in social psychology, we'll be talking a lot about that today, from York University, Meagan's academic credentials include a Master's of Social Work in Clinical Social Work from Wilfrid Laurier, a Master in Arts in Community Psychology from the University of Toronto, and a BA in Psychology from the University of Guelph. Meagan, Dr. Yarmey, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Super excited to be here. This is fun.
We are super excited to have you. We have, as I said, the 5 biggest questions. Today, we're going to talk a lot about social psychology and organizational psychology. But first, can you share with the listeners, out of all the fields, why did you get into mental health care? Why into psychology?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first and foremost, the reality is I grew up in an academic family. My father was a research psychologist. So we grew up in a small town, Guelph, which is a university town. Early on, I got involved in my dad's research. Didn't really know what psychology was at the time, but as I, grew, participated in his research, and then I went to University of Guelph, I inherently seemed to gravitate to the study of human behavior and psychology. So that's why everyone in my family, I was, somehow involved in psychology, level of curiosity. At one point, I thought, oh, I want to be a medical doctor. I was really interested in the mind-body connection. At another point, I thought, oh no, I want to be a lawyer. And so over time, eventually, through my various studies, I combined the two and looked at issues around jury decision-making, women's health. So it was a unique combination, I think, is a process of self-discovery and something that truly interested me. The spin to mental health eventually came through over time as well. Lived experience, if that
Love that.
makes
Thank you
sense.
for sharing that. What an
Yeah.
interesting journey.
Yeah,
What are
thank
some
you.
of the things that right now you're really excited about, interested about in the field of psychology?
Yeah, wow, there's so many. Right now, my clinical practice, I think something that's really current and timely is putting together a program, group therapy around imposter syndrome. I think imposter syndrome speaks to a number of high achieving individuals. It taps into some of those underlying drivers that we all experience to different degrees. It's not a pathology, it's more of understanding how can I best understand self and utilize tools and strategies to help myself better navigate and present myself as my best in whatever circumstance, primarily in the workforce, but in other aspects of my life. So we're dealing with things around confidence, self-esteem, understanding my attitudes, understanding how I relate to others, self-perception. These are all topics that really are out of social psychology and then in an applied sense, organizational psychology, and then often have a clinical application. So that's one of the main topics I've been looking at recently, but I'm always interested in a number of different things around anxiety, social anxiety, public speaking, attribution theory. I also have a side interest in terms of looking at sort of an Eastern approach, Eastern philosophy to how to enhance our sense of well-being. So well-being is another term an area that I've really spent a lot of time focusing on.
I love that. Let's start with our first big question of today and take a step back and talk about what is social psychology in general. We listed sort of those different things that come from social psychology, like talking about imposter syndrome, social anxiety, but what is the discipline itself? Let's start there.
Yeah, so social psychology is one of those fields that most of us know about. We don't know it actually comes from social psychology. So the field of human behavior, right, which is psychology, is broken into different components. So we all know of clinical psychology. Most people know that first and foremost. One little side tidbit was quite interesting is that clinical psychology used to be a combination of both the study of social psychology and clinical psychology, because there's so much of social psychology that impacts distress or psychological disorders. So social psychology really focuses on people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and how they're influenced by the presence of others. So we don't live in a vacuum. We are social creatures. So how I feel about myself is often influenced by the perception of others. So things such as group dynamics, attitudes, prejudice, identity, decision-making, interpersonal relationships, love, all of these things are often the topics that's studied within social psychology. We have a very applied aspect of it. So we have straight theoretical social psychology, and then we have applied social psychology. So for example, jury decision-making would be something that comes out of applied social psychology. We're looking at group dynamics. How do people come to decision-making process from a group? And then what are the impacts? So perception of others, perception of self, attributions of responsibility and blame, all of these in a social context, which fall under the domain of what social psychology is.
That's really, really interesting. And so it sounds like a lot of social psychology, like we don't live in a vacuum, as you said. It's not just how I think about myself, but it could be my understanding of how I think of how Meagan thinks about me and how I might act in different ways around that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For a great example, if we want to take that and put into a clinical context, is social anxiety. So an individual may come to a clinician to say, I'm really dealing with things around how I interact with others. I have difficulty going to parties or talking in class or talking in a work meeting because I perceive that other people might be judging me by focusing on other. So there's that, how do I interact with others is now causing some distress within self. So I need to learn as the client, how can I navigate that? What are the tools to help me better relate, develop a sense of confidence in self, and not focus on the others and what I perceive to be the factors that other is thinking about me. So there's a lot of it in our world that often we don't really recognize because we are socialized. Like social psychology talks about the socialization process and how we perceive it to be. Often we take it for granted. So that's another great example of a great social, I think it's actually considered social developmental, is a model called Bronfenbrenner's social ecological model, where the individual is embedded in different systems, and the systems each impact the individual. So how that person thinks is influenced by time, their circle of influence, by those individuals, be it a school embedded in a time period in a certain place in the country, in the world. All of these factors impact how the individual feels about self and perceives others.
It's really interesting. And actually, when I was in school for child and youth counseling, that was a big piece of it. How, a kid in a certain context may act different than a kid presenting similar things, but in a different context.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think you've nailed it really well. So social psychology identifies and addresses the context and how that context can impact and play out on a person's thought processes, their emotional experience, and then how they behave.
Taking that next step, how does research in social psychology, all of those different concepts, inform your approach and other psychologists' approach in understanding workplace dynamic, well-being? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, most definitely, I'd say I draw on the influence of what's called social cognition. So how we are social thinkers. So that theoretical model influences how or informs how I work with a client. But I don't think I just leave it with social psychology. I'm certainly influenced by theoretical models that come out of community psychology. So community psychology is another area under the umbrella of various components or areas of study within psychology that focuses on systemic factors that influence human behaviors, really looking at it as a preventative approach. It doesn't get into a clinical sense, but works at a systems level. So issues around social justice, empowerment, social norms, cultural influence. So identifying those factors that may impact an individual. So I would draw on community psychology, social psychology, and then factors that come from things like clinical social work. So depending on what the project is, am I working at an individual level with the individual client, or am I working at a systems level? So, for example, a systems level would be designing a prevention program around mental health literacy. How can I go into an environment, talk to the client, identify what their needs are, and then around, say, let's develop a well-being program specific to a certain age group so identify the needs, and then draw on factors from the literature that are very applied to say, let's tailor a program to help students or workers, staff develop a sense of creating belonging, right? Within the school, within the organization. So depending, it's what is the assessment and then the implementation of theoretical models with an applied sense. Does that make sense?
It totally does. So looking at a more specific example, like let's say we take self-doubt, we take perfectionism. Like in work, in an organization, crushing it, doing really well means you get a move up. It means you're getting that raise. It means you're doing well at the performance review, so on and so forth. But really, the truth is, we know, you're scrolling through Instagram, you're scrolling everywhere, that failure is also really important to learning. But I feel like, and I'm definitely, I definitely fit into this boat. You want to crush it. You want to be perfect. And in a way that sort of feeds into that anxiety, feeds into that feedback loop, and can create instances in which we're actually failing because we're trying to be too perfect.
Absolutely. So if we look at the literature around imposter syndrome, perfectionism, the underlying things are, what is that level of self-talk? What am I telling myself that creates a narrative? A narrative then impacts how I respond to it. So if I'm telling myself, okay, I have to perform at a level that is close to perfect. If I don't, I will be reprimanded. I will be judged. So we look at that. What is it? The fear of judgment, the fear of failure. When we do that, we become so rigid that we're not able to be in the moment and perform in something we often call flow, right? So we want to get to a place to identify for our client. Let's start paying attention to, how do I talk to myself? What are the expectations I place on self? How do I respond to my perceived sense of judgment by other? Can I start to develop a sense of confidence in myself and my skill set that is realistic to the scope of the job, setting goals that are realistic? Can I then develop a mindset, right, that we often hear of, a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, and use every opportunity to develop mastery of the task that then creates a sense of capability and confidence. So if we set realistic goals, we become aware of the self-talk that we have, aware of the self-expectations, we will then hopefully over time perform. But when we focus on things such as social media, that pressure to be perfect, that pressure, these unrealistic expectations of others then become internalized. They don't allow us to relax into being our best self. So it's a combination of, paying attention to what do I tell myself, having realistic self-talk, realistic self-expectations, goals, and then the follow through of that. Getting feedback, incorporating that feedback that will help me to grow and over time develop those skill sets. So in an organization, having that awareness, if you're in terms of management role, leadership role, is, can we set realistic expectations for our staff? As an employee, can I set realistic expectations for myself? Develop the support networks, the skill sets to develop that over time. Mastery is, yeah, great, I crushed it. I can do it again. Oh, maybe the feedback is I didn't crush it. Where's the growth opportunity? So that self-compassion piece is really important as well, right?
Totally. I love that. And it sounds like there's sort of like a few key pieces here. Number one, perfectionism exists. But why is being perfect? Why is that important to us? And it sounds like what you're saying is that there's often some kind of anxiety, some kind of underlying fear that sort of pushes people into that direction. I think on the individual level, that's really, really important to understand. On the organizational level, as an individual or as a leader, setting those goals and working with your team to build, the OKRs or whatever the case is, what are the ways that we can shape failure as growth experiences? And also, what are the ways in which we can reinforce when people are actually doing really, really well and crushing it?
Absolutely. So that taps into things such as communication styles, validation, collaborative goal setting, positive feedback loops, debriefs, so that it is a process rather than focusing on the outcome. So if we can get into the process of development for self as an individual and process development as management, as leadership, I think it's much more of a win-win. It looks at it over time. I think perfectionism is, again, if we pull back, what are the circumstances that develop that way of thinking that leads to a sense of rigidity? So if we can restructure that thought into striving for excellence, striving for good, and then we continue to create the bar. There is no perfection, right? That perfection always changes. So we're chasing a carrot, and in that process, becoming very rigid and tight and not setting ourselves up for success. So we want to enjoy the moments, be present, and attain something that approximate our goals so we can actually enjoy the process and the outcome, the merits of the outcome.
Perfectionism as rigidity kind of really resonates with me a lot. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So let's step into that a little bit more. So looking at the organization, looking about trust, team dynamics, what can we learn from social psychology and organizational psychology and all of these wonderful disciplines about building trust with your teams, with your people, and improving those dynamics?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think trust is earned. I think it's about taking opportunities as a leader in whatever role that is to role model, right? To mentor, to utilize open communication styles, to understand other. To do that, we need to develop a sense of what is called a psychological sense of belonging, so that our team, our staff, our colleagues feel that they are seen, valued, heard, that their opinions, their contributions are considered, that we have appropriate discussion around it, that when feedback is delivered, it is presented in a way that is constructive, so that people aren't feeling that they are belittled, reprimanded. So trust is a process that is established over time and maintained by these communication processes about a style of leadership and openness. I think it also speaks to things such as authenticity, right? So if we want to develop a cohesive team that people are aligning with their values and goals, we need to speak to, can we show up as our authentic selves? And so that, how is that? What is my understanding, my perception of self, my perception of other? How can I help to establish a dynamic, an environment, a cultural sense within that team, within the community that we value each of our members? How do I do that? By first understanding who I am, where are my strengths, what are my values? Can I present them and feel safe enough to be authentic, that psychological sense of authenticity, and create a norm that encourages others to show up as their authentic self. So I think these are processes. I think it's a learning process where we strive, we collect data in whatever form that is, we evaluate it, and then we learn from it. We don't keep repeating the same patterns. And I think, again, to throw out those terms is, can I be who I truly am with all my strengths and opportunities to grow, to add value to whatever our team goal is?
I hear stories all the time of people and teams who are sort of like, when there's a crisis, there's, like certain benefits or certain systems that a team can put into place when that crisis hits. But if we look at it in the reverse way, if we start by building trust with our teams in all of those big moments, all of those growth moments, we have the trust for somebody to come up to us and say, hey, I'm really struggling at home with blank, or I'm struggling with this addiction, or I'm struggling with my mental health, and I need to know what to access. Creating that trust in all of those other situations opens up the doors for that mid-level severity conversation as well.
Absolutely. So the individual doesn't judge self, or what we call stigmatize, so self-stigma, when there's an acceptance of, I see who you are. There is space, compassion, empathy for the human condition, and that life challenges can happen. And I am a safe place to talk about this. We together can come up with a strategy of potential resolution that may help to support you and allow you to heal, recover, and join us as to the best of your capacity now, and with a goal of recovery and joining us fully once we get through that. So again, it's that the acceptance of self is not being your employee and expect you to be a static, perfect person at all times, right? We're open to the shifts, we adapt, and we utilize agility and resilience, right? For self and for our team, for other.
I love that, agility and resilience. I think that's a great segue into this last question, which is, what are your top tips for balancing personal well-being with the demands of high-stress careers?
Great question. I like the term well-being. I'm going to start off with that because it gets away from the sense of when we talk about mental health, I still think within society, we have this, mental health means mental illness. We're shifting, which I think is fantastic. With more and more education and acceptance, we are getting to that place. Why I like well-being is that sense of well-being is more than just physical. It is a whole robust, comprehensive approach to how can I manage the challenges that life presents me by using the strategies and tools so that I create balance in my life. So well-being is a comprehensive approach that talks about my psychological well-being, my social emotional well-being, my physical well-being, even potentially my spiritual well-being. So when I look at what are the skills or tips and strategies, is one, let's first understand self. Who am I? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Can I be really honest as to what's causing me distress right now? So that gives me the insight, right? So then, okay, if I'm struggling and it's psychological, am I struggling at work, or am I struggling with something with this an addiction because I'm not coping with work, or I'm having family challenges? What are the things that I can do? Do I need to talk to a clinician, a counselor? Do I draw on my support network? Do I develop new tools? Maybe it's a combination. I like a comprehensive circle of care approach. No one person is going to be able to provide all the answers. So maybe it's journaling, because that's something I can choose to do on my own. When I work with clients or developing a well-being framework, which I've done in organizations, is I like to provide different components that can speak to individuals. So identify what are the things I need to do for my mental well-being. Okay, journaling, making sure I have the right support network, really understanding my own self-talk. Social emotionally, am I getting enough support, enough social inclusion, enough social activity in my life? Am I getting involved? Social isolation can create space to open up negative self-talk. We need a balance between how much we get involved with others, because we're not living in a vacuum. We all are social creatures. Know how much social activity I need. Do I understand what's causing my emotional reactions? Right? I am an emotional being. All emotions are valid emotions. What are causing these emotional responses? So really understanding that around, there's a theorist, practitioner named Mark Brackett, who has a ruler approach, which is fantastic. You might have heard a little bit about that. It's really understanding, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? What is my mood? How can I learn to regulate it? And then, of course, most of us know there is a physical capacity. My body follows the mind. So when I become physical and active by taking care of my body through different activities, going to the gym, running, meditation, yoga, whatever works for you. It's not prescriptive. It's not like do this, this, and this is a magic bullet. It's knowing what's going to resonate within me. What do I need to do? What's going to make me feel better over a time period? So it's not every single day I do this. I pick, it's like a smorgasbord of understanding, this is working. I'm getting feedback from it. Fantastic. Keep doing it. And then, there's a spiritual piece. Now that can be meditating. It can be going to a temple. It can be going to a church, whatever works for you as an individual. And then we build out. So it's understanding self and then picking those things from a comprehensive model of what will make you feel well and doing it over a long term.
I think there's a few pieces here. One, there's the mental illness exists, but there's also mental well-being. And when we're looking at mental well-being, we're looking at ourselves and what makes us full. We can have the things we can do on our own. We have our non-professional supports and family and loved ones and partners and friends and community members that we can access. There's professional supports. and then those pieces as well. And it's really this whole holistic circle of care model, as opposed to, yeah, if you do these like 3 things, you're going to be all right, kid.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. I think it is. It's, again, I think you summarized it really well. It's understanding yourself and knowing what's going to resonate with balance. It's really balance that will take us forward. Hopefully.
Fantastic. Meagan, it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to have you on the show. If you were to leave listeners with one piece of advice around starting their own journey with mental health, what would you tell them?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, I always say to my clients, it's 2 pieces. I like to put it into insight, execution. Understand who you are, right? Understand your story to date. What are all those amazing things experiences in your life that have made you the person you are? What were those challenges? What are those hindrances? Okay, great. Let's learn some tools, skills around it, and then let's start executing, right? So insight, tools, execution. We do that over time, come back, tweak, go out, and we are an evolution of self. That insight helps us to understand what's that unique value? Who am I? And how can I strengthen it and flourish in the world? And how can I give it back to the community so I can shine?
And for all of our listeners out there, I know you mentioned that group therapy program that you're running. Where can people find you, learn more about the work that you do, learn more about the group therapy program?
Absolutely. So everyone can find me at Amanda Tobe and Associates. There's information about the imposter syndrome group that's going to be coming up towards the end of January, February. It's a 10-week program. It's really interactive. It's solutions focused. It's a fun, great, insightful dynamic, which I'm sure you're going to learn a lot about. So just Google me or check out the website and all the information will come up. And I look forward to meeting some new people and helping everyone who joins on their journey.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Meagan.
Thank you.
And for those of you looking to learn a little bit more about EH in Canada, it's a place for both virtual and inpatient treatment programs for mental health and addiction. I can check it out at ehncanada.com. And to listen to even more episodes of the 5 Facts podcast, we even had Amanda Tobe, Dr. Tobe, on the show as well. You can check it out on your favorite streaming platform. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.